This groundbreaking 1978 film about teen heroin addiction shocked audiences by earning a PG rating despite showing 13-year-olds injecting drugs, featured an unusual toy company partnership, and marked the final curtain for its Oscar-nominated director, plus a cast reunion with a twisted role reversal that still surprises viewers today. Fact 1. Shocking PG rating, despite explicit drug content. If you watched A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich today, you'd probably assume it was rated R. But back in 1978, this film about teenage heroin addiction somehow earned a PG rating from the Motion Picture Association of America. What makes this so shocking is just how graphic the content actually was for that rating, especially by modern standards where the MPAA has become much stricter about what qualifies for different age categories. The film doesn't shy away from showing the harsh reality of drug use among children, with multiple scenes depicting 13-year-old characters actually injecting heroin into their arms. These weren't just implied or suggested moments shot carefully to avoid showing anything explicit. The camera captured the preparation of drugs, the needles, and the injection process in ways that would make today's ratings board immediately slap an R rating on the film without hesitation. On top of that, the movie included partial nudity and dropped the F word at least twice during its runtime, which alone would typically push a film into restricted territory under current MPAA guidelines. What's particularly interesting is that this PG rating came during a transitional period for the MPAA rating system, before the PG-13 category was introduced in 1984. Films had to fit into either G, PG, R, or X ratings, which meant there was more flexibility in what could slip into the PG category. Still, even for that era, the decision to rate a film showing children using hard drugs as suitable for general audiences with parental guidance seemed remarkably lenient. Many viewers who discover this film today are stunned to learn it carried the same rating as family-friendly movies, making it one of the most controversial PG-rated films in cinema history. Fact 2. Director's swan song, Ralph Nelson's final film. A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich holds a bittersweet place in cinema history as the final theatrical film directed by Ralph Nelson, marking the end of a remarkable career that spanned several decades in Hollywood. Nelson passed away in 1987, nearly a decade after this film's release, but he never directed another feature for theatrical distribution after completing this gritty drama about teenage drug addiction in South Central Los Angeles. What makes this particularly poignant is the impressive body of work Nelson left behind before concluding with this film. He had established himself as a director willing to tackle socially conscious stories, with depth and sensitivity, earning widespread acclaim for Lilies of the Field back in 1963, which became notable as the film that earned Sidney Poitier the Academy Award for Best Actor, making him the first African-American man to win that honor. Nelson followed that success with Charlie in 1968, another critically praised film that won Cliff Robertson the Oscar for Best Actor, proving Nelson had a gift for drawing out powerful performances from his leading men. Throughout his career, Nelson demonstrated a consistent interest in directing what were called social issue films, taking on subjects that other directors might have avoided because they were controversial or uncommercially risky. His filmography included stories about racism, apartheid, and the struggles of marginalized communities. So ending his theatrical directing career with a raw, unflinching look at how heroin devastated young black lives in urban America felt entirely consistent with the themes he had explored throughout his life's work. After A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich, Nelson only directed made-for-television movies before retiring from filmmaking altogether. Fact 3. The novel was Supreme Court case material. The original novel that inspired this film sparked one of the most significant censorship battles in American literary history, becoming one of only 9 books ever brought before the United States Supreme Court to decide whether local communities had the right to ban it from school libraries. Alice Childress wrote A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich in 1973 as a young adult novel told from multiple perspectives about a 13-year-old boy struggling with heroin addiction in Harlem, and almost immediately the book faced challenges from parents and school boards who felt its content was too mature or inappropriate for teenage readers. The controversy reached its first major flashpoint in Savannah, Georgia, where the school system banned the book in 1973, making it the first book officially removed from those schools since J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye had been banned back in the 1950s. But the battle didn't end there, as the book later became part of the landmark Supreme Court case known as Board of Education versus Pico in 1982, where students from the Island Trees School District in New York challenged their school board's decision to remove this book along with several others from school library shelves. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the students, recognizing that their First Amendment rights were directly implicated when books were removed from school libraries based on content the board found objectionable. Despite the legal victory and the novel winning numerous prestigious awards, including being named one of the outstanding books of the year by the New York Times Book Review, the controversy followed the book for years, with various school districts continuing to challenge its presence in libraries well into the 1980s and 90s. Fact 4. Larry B. Scott's dramatic feature debut. For actor Larry B. Scott, A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich represented his very first appearance in a theatrical film, and it couldn't have been a more intense introduction to movie acting for someone who was only 16 years old at the time. Scott played Benji, the troubled 13-year-old protagonist who becomes addicted to heroin, which meant his debut role required him to portray scenes of drug use, family conflict, and the devastating spiral of addiction with a level of emotional depth that would challenge even experienced actors. What makes Scott's career trajectory particularly interesting is how drastically different his breakout role would be just 6 years later. In 1984, Scott became widely recognized for playing Lamar Luttrell in Revenge of the Nerds, a character who was flamboyantly gay and became one of the most memorable parts of that comedy film. The contrast between these two roles couldn't be more stark, going from a gritty, realistic drama about a young black teenager struggling with heroin in South Central Los Angeles to a broad college comedy where he portrayed a nerdy fraternity member who loved to dance and proudly embraced his sexuality. Scott later reflected on the challenges of playing Lamar, mentioning in interviews that he faced criticism from some members of the black community at the time who felt frustrated that one of the few black actors appearing in mainstream 80s comedies had to play a gay character. He defended his choice by explaining that he viewed himself as an actor taking on challenging roles rather than limiting himself to certain types of characters, and he noted that his work in A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich had already proven his range and dramatic abilities early in his career. Fact 5. The Mattel Toy Company connection. One of the strangest details about A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich is finding the Mattel logo in the opening credits, which seems completely out of place for a gritty drama about teenage heroin addiction until you understand the unusual business arrangement that made this film possible. The production company, listed as Radnitz/Mattel Productions, represented a joint venture between acclaimed producer Robert B. Radnitz and Mattel Incorporated, the same toy manufacturing giant that created Barbie dolls, Hot Wheels cars, and countless other children's playthings that have been household names for generations. This partnership between Radnitz and Mattel actually started back in 1970, with the goal of producing quality family films that would carry positive messages and showcase excellent storytelling rather than just serving as commercial vehicles for toy products. The venture had already found success with Sounder in 1972, a powerful drama about an African tipes, American sharecropping family during the Great Depression that earned multiple Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and they followed that with Where the Lilies Bloom in 1974, another family-oriented film set in rural Appalachia. What made A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich different from those earlier productions was its willingness to tackle much darker subject matter that pushed beyond typical family film territory into genuinely challenging content about drug abuse among children. Mattel's involvement in financing a film that showed 13-year-olds injecting heroin seems almost incomprehensible by today's corporate standards, where toy companies carefully guard their brand image and avoid any association with controversial content. But this partnership reflected a brief period when the company was willing to support serious dramatic films that addressed important social issues affecting young people. Fact 6. Sounder cast reunion with twisted role. Reversal: A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich brought together 3 actors from the critically acclaimed film Sounder in a reunion that featured one of the most jarring role reversals in cinema history. Cicely Tyson, Paul Winfield, and Kevin Hooks had worked together on Sounder back in 1972, where Tyson and Winfield played a married sharecropping couple struggling through the Great Depression, while Hooks portrayed their young son, creating a touching family dynamic that earned both adult actors Academy Award nominations for their performances. When these 3 reunited for A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich just 5 years later, Tyson and Winfield once again played a romantic couple trying to raise a family in difficult circumstances, maintaining that same warm chemistry audiences had loved in their previous collaboration. However, Kevin Hooks took on a completely different kind of role this time around, playing Tiger, the smooth-talking neighborhood drug dealer who becomes responsible for luring the young protagonist Benji into heroin addiction and ultimately destroys his innocence. The contrast between Hooks playing the innocent, hopeful son in Sounder and then appearing as the predatory drug pusher in this film created an unsettling dynamic for anyone familiar with the earlier movie, as audiences had to reconcile seeing the same actor who had been the vulnerable child now portraying someone who preys on vulnerable children. This casting choice added an extra layer of tragedy to the story, as if the filmmakers were showing how the same community that once nurtured children through hardship could also produce forces that led them down destructive paths, with Hooks serving as a bridge between these 2 very different but equally powerful narratives about Black families facing adversity. Fact 7. Paul Winfield's generous billing sacrifice. The professional relationship between Paul Winfield and Cicely Tyson revealed a rare act of generosity in Hollywood when Winfield made an extraordinary decision regarding billing credits on their film Sounder that showed just how much he respected his co-star's talent. In the film industry, billing order is typically determined by contractual negotiations, and actors or their agents fight hard to secure top billing because having your name appear first in the credits signals status, importance, and can affect future negotiations for other projects. Winfield had negotiated a contract for Sounder that gave him the legal right to first billing, meaning his name would appear before Tyson's in all promotional materials and opening credits. However, after filming wrapped and Winfield watched the completed movie, he went to the producers and insisted that Tyson receive top billing instead, essentially giving away something that most actors would guard jealously because it represented both prestige and potential career advancement. Tyson later shared her amazement at this gesture in interviews, recounting how she told Winfield, quote, "You're insane. Your agent and manager negotiated a contract and you get first billing," end quote. But Winfield simply smiled at her and responded that when she saw the movie, she would understand why he made that choice, recognizing that her performance as the resilient wife and mother carried the emotional weight of the entire film. Tyson reflected on this moment by saying, quote, "I don't know another human being in the business that would have done that because billing is what we live for," end quote, emphasizing how unusual and selfless Winfield's decision truly was in an industry where such gestures are almost unheard of. Fact 8. First Black woman to write Broadway play, Alice Childress, who wrote both the original novel and the screenplay for A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich, had already made history multiple times before this film was ever produced, breaking barriers that had kept Black women out of the most prestigious levels of American theater and literature. Childress became the first Black woman to have a professional play produced on Broadway, marking a significant milestone in an industry that had historically excluded African American women from having their voices heard on the most important stages in the country. Her groundbreaking success continued when she won an OBIE Award for her play Trouble in Mind, during the 1955-56 season, which made her the first woman of any race to receive that honor. The OBIE Awards recognize excellence in off-Broadway theater, and Trouble in Mind was particularly notable because it dealt with racial stereotyping in the theater itself, telling the story of black actors struggling with a white director who wants them to conform to demeaning stereotypes, which reflected Childress's own experiences and observations about how the entertainment industry treated African American performers. By the time she wrote A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich in the early 1970s, Childress had established herself as an artist who refused to compromise her vision or soften difficult truths about racism, poverty, and social injustice just to make her work more palatable to mainstream audiences. When her novel faced banning and censorship attempts across the country, she maintained control over the film adaptation by writing the screenplay herself, ensuring that the story's unflinching look at how drugs devastated black communities would remain intact despite pressure from various groups who wanted the material toned down or made less controversial. Fact 9. Helen Martin's hidden Broadway legend status. Most television audiences knew Helen Martin as the feisty neighbor Pearl Shea on the sitcom 227, which ran from 1985 to 1990, or as Weeping Wanda on Good Times during the 1970s. But very few fans realized they were watching someone who had been a legendary figure in American theater for decades before she ever appeared on a television screen. Martin was one of the founding members of the American Negro Theater in Harlem, an enormously influential organization established in the early 1940s that helped launch the careers of countless black performers and provided crucial opportunities during an era when mainstream theater remained largely closed to African American artists. Her Broadway career began back in 1937 when she appeared in a production called Orchids Preferred, and she went on to perform in at least a dozen major Broadway shows over the following decades, including appearing in Orson Welles' acclaimed production of Native Son in 1941, which was one of the most important theatrical events of that era. Martin also starred in productions of The Blacks by Jean Genet, the musical Raisin, which ran from 1973 to 75, Ossie Davis's Pearlie Victorious, and its later musical adaptation simply called Pearlie, the Amen Corner, and Tennessee Williams's Period of Adjustment. By the time she appeared in A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich in 1978, Martin had already accumulated roughly 4 decades of professional stage experience, making her one of the most seasoned and respected performers in the entire cast. Even though she was playing a supporting role as the grandmother and wouldn't achieve widespread recognition from general audiences until her television work later in life. Fact 10. Shot on location in South Central LA. Rather than filming on Hollywood sound stages or using generic locations that could pass for any urban neighborhood, director Ralph Nelson made the deliberate choice to shoot A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich entirely on location in South Central Los Angeles, embedding the production directly within the community whose struggles the film aimed to portray. This decision gave the movie an authentic visual texture that would have been impossible to replicate. On a backlot, capturing the real streets, houses, and buildings where the story's events could have actually taken place during the height of the heroin epidemic that devastated inner-city neighborhoods throughout the 1970s. The production used actual South Central locations for nearly every scene in the film, including the middle school sequences, which were filmed at a real educational facility located at 4410 McKinley Avenue. Using genuine community spaces rather than dressed-up Hollywood sets meant that local residents would have seen film crews working in their neighborhood, and the backdrop visible in every frame reflected the true environment where young people like the protagonist Benji were growing up and facing the temptations and dangers that the story depicted. This commitment to authentic location shooting aligned with the broader goals of the filmmakers who wanted to present drug addiction in black communities as a real social crisis rather than an abstract concept or a backdrop for exploitation cinema. By placing cameras on the actual streets of South Central rather than creating a sanitized or dramatized version of that environment, The production team reinforced the film's message that this wasn't just a fictional story, but a reflection of genuine struggles happening in real neighborhoods where families were trying to protect their children from forces threatening to destroy their futures. Fact 11. Alice Childress fought for rating control. Alice Childress found herself in an unexpected battle with the Motion Picture Association of America when the ratings board initially wanted to assign an R rating to A, Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich, which would have prevented anyone under 17 from seeing the film without a parent or guardian accompanying them. Childress strongly opposed this decision because she believed the film's anti-drug message needed to reach the exact audience that an R rating would restrict, namely, teenagers who were at the age where they might actually be confronted with the choice to experiment with drugs or resist peer pressure from friends already using them. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Childress, who had already spent years defending her original novel against school boards and parent groups who wanted to ban it for being too explicit about drug use and the realities of life in urban Black communities. Now she faced the opposite problem, fighting to make the film version more accessible rather than less, arguing that showing the harsh consequences of heroin addiction in graphic detail served an educational purpose that justified allowing younger viewers to watch it with parental guidance rather than requiring them to be accompanied by adults. Her arguments eventually succeeded in convincing the ratings board to assign a PG rating instead of the originally proposed R, though this decision would later become controversial in its own right when critics pointed out how much explicit content the film contained despite that more permissive rating. Childress maintained throughout these debates that young people deserved honest, unflinching portrayals of the dangers they faced, rather than sanitized versions that failed to convey the true devastation that drug addiction could bring to individuals, families, and entire communities. Fact 12. Paul Winfield lived with Cicely Tyson. The deep friendship between Paul Winfield and Cicely Tyson extended far beyond their professional collaboration, as demonstrated by a living arrangement they shared in the early 1970s that reflected both her compassion and the difficult reality gay actors faced in Hollywood during that era. While working together on the set of Sounder, Winfield confided in Tyson about his sexuality at a time when being openly gay could effectively end an actor's career, especially for Black performers who already faced significant discrimination and limited opportunities in the film industry. Tyson responded to this revelation by offering Winfield a place to stay in her home, and he lived with her for approximately 18 months during the early 70s. This generous gesture provided Winfield with a safe space and supportive environment during a period when he was navigating the challenges of being a gay man in an industry that expected its leading men to maintain at least the appearance of heterosexuality, particularly as both actors were receiving major attention following their Oscar nominations for Sounder. The living situation inevitably led to speculation among industry insiders and the public that Tyson and Winfield were romantically involved, which wasn't an unreasonable assumption given that they were two attractive, talented, unmarried actors who had displayed remarkable chemistry on screen and were now sharing a home together. However, neither Tyson nor Winfield made any effort to correct this misconception or clarify the true nature of their relationship, essentially allowing people to believe whatever they wanted rather than forcing Winfield to publicly discuss his sexuality before he was ready to do so, which wouldn't happen until much later in his life and career when attitudes had begun to shift. Fact 13. Glynn Turman nearly became Han Solo. Glynn Turman, who portrayed the passionate African history teacher Nigeria Green in A Hero Ain't Nothing But a Sandwich, came remarkably close to landing one of the most iconic roles in cinema history when George Lucas considered him for the part of Han Solo in Star Wars, which was released in 1977, just 1 year before this film came out. Turman later confirmed in a 2007 interview that Lucas had actually included his name in the director's notes as a potential candidate for the role of the charismatic smuggler, who would become one of the most beloved characters in the entire Star Wars franchise. According to Turman's account of what happened during the casting process, Lucas ultimately decided not to pursue him for the role because of concerns about potential controversy surrounding an interracial romantic relationship between Han Solo and Princess Leia, who would be played by white actress Carrie Fisher. This decision reflected the unfortunate reality of Hollywood in the 1970s, when studio executives and filmmakers still worried that showing romantic connections between black men and white women on screen might alienate certain audiences or limit a film's commercial appeal in some markets, despite the fact that interracial marriage had been legal throughout the United States since the Supreme Court's Loving v. Virginia decision a decade earlier in 1967. The role of Han Solo ultimately went to Harrison Ford, who became a massive star thanks to that performance, while Turman continued building his career with roles in films like Gremlins in 1984, and eventually found success on television series including The Wire, where he played Baltimore Mayor Clarence Royce in the 2000s. Fact 14. The novel's unique multi-voice structure. Alice Childress constructed her original novel, A Hero Ain't Nothin' But a Sandwich, using an innovative narrative technique that set it apart from typical young adult fiction of that era. Building the story through 23 separate short chapters, where each one was told from the perspective of a different character involved in or affected by the protagonist Benji's descent into heroin addiction. Rather than following a traditional linear narrative with one main point of view, readers heard directly from Benji himself, his mother Sweets, his stepfather Butler, his grandmother Mrs. Bell, his teachers at school, his best friend, the drug dealer Tiger who got him hooked, and various other people whose lives intersected with his struggle. This polyphonic approach created something resembling a documentary or oral history project where the full picture of what was happening only emerged through combining all these different testimonies and viewpoints, each revealing aspects of the situation that the other characters couldn't see or understand. The drug dealer explained his own justifications for selling heroin to children. The teachers discussed their frustration at watching bright students like Benji throw away their potential. The grandmother shared her grief and confusion about how this could happen in her family. And Benji's own chapters showed how he rationalized his addiction and convinced himself he could quit anytime he wanted. When Childress adapted her novel into a screenplay, she maintained this ensemble approach by giving significant screen time and development to the supporting characters rather than focusing exclusively on Benji's story, allowing the film to explore how addiction ripples outward to damage entire families and communities rather than treating it as simply an individual problem with an individual solution. Fact 15. Released during blaxploitation era, but different. A Hero Ain't Nothin' But a Sandwich entered theaters in 1978 during the height of the blaxploitation film movement, which had dominated black cinema throughout the 70s with movies like Shaft, Sweet Sweetback's Badass's Song, Dolomite, Foxy Brown, and dozens of similar action-packed films that featured black protagonists fighting crime, seeking revenge, or navigating dangerous urban underworlds while surrounded by violence, sexuality, and flashy style. However, this film represented something completely different from what audiences had come to expect from movies featuring predominantly black casts during that era. While blaxploitation films typically emphasized exciting action sequences, tough anti-heroes who solved problems with guns or martial arts, attractive women in revealing clothing, and soundtracks filled with funk music, A Hero Ain't Nothin' But a Sandwich focused on a working-class family struggling to save a 13-year-old boy from heroin addiction through love, communication, and community support. The film deliberately avoided the exploitation elements that defined the genre, refusing to glamorize drug culture or present the drug dealer as a cool figure to be admired, and instead showing the unglamorous reality of addiction with all its pain, confusion, and devastating impact on families trying to hold themselves together. This approach aligned the film more closely with other serious dramas about African American life like Sounder and Claudine, rather than with the escapist entertainment that blaxploitation offered, making it an unusual entry in the landscape of black cinema at that time. The filmmakers clearly intended to present an authentic portrait of the challenges facing Black communities rather than packaging those struggles into crowd-pleasing genre entertainment, even though that choice likely limited the film's commercial appeal compared to more action-oriented alternatives.